Takumi finds himself transported to another world, standing before the goddess Nolan. The first thing she does is offer a heartfelt apology, explaining that his summoning was a complete mistake. She reveals that when a summoning spell is cast, it typically targets a random group of Earth's losers to transport them to another world. However, Takumi's life was actually going quite well, so he wasn't supposed to be included. Unfortunately, due to a mishap, he was swept up in the summoning process along with everyone else. The blame falls on the Holy Sidonia Empire, which recklessly activated the summoning spell. Since Takumi wasn't intended to be summoned, Nolan brought him directly to her instead of sending him to Sidonia with the other summoned heroes. Takumi asks Nolan if she can simply send him back to Earth, given that his summoning was a mistake. Unfortunately, she explains that it's not possible. Out of sheer anger at Sidonia for using the forbidden summoning spell, she immediately removed it from this world's magical laws, ensuring that no one could travel between worlds anymore. As a result, Takumi is now permanently stuck here. To make matters worse, the summoning process technically killed him. When Takumi realizes he's now a disembodied ghost, he begins to panic, but Nolan reassures him that there's no need to worry. While she can't return him to Earth, she can provide him with a new body and help him start a new life as a citizen of this world. As an apology, since this is partially her fault, she offers to grant him her blessing to make his life easier. Takumi doesn't really have much of a choice, so he agrees to be reborn into this world. Nolan is glad to hear that because it makes this a lot easier for her. She tells him to open his status screen to check out the new life he will have. When Takumi does, he finds out that Nolan is planning to give him a 17-year-old body, even though he's 40. Nolan tells him not to bother with the minor details. More importantly, he still needs to pick out his job. She tells him that there are two main classes for jobs. If Takumi wants something more combat-focused, he can pick things like swordsman, knight, or hunter. But if that doesn't appeal to him, he could always pick one of the production jobs instead. Takumi isn't too keen on the idea of fighting, so he opts for a production-focused job instead. Nolan proceeds to embed the job into his soul, along with several extra blessings, before sending him on his way, completely forgetting to provide any sort of tutorial. Takumi crash lands in the middle of a forest, and after managing to get back on his feet, he catches his reflection in a nearby river. It's then he realizes he's truly become a different person, and to his amazement, his arthritis is gone. Deciding to make the most of his new situation, he checks the bag Nolan left with him to see what he's been given. Inside, he finds some food rations and money, which means he doesn't need to worry about starving for the time being. Takumi checks his status screen and sees that Nolan really went all out, granting him an impressive array of useful skills. Among them, he notices elemental magic, so he decides to test it out. Holding out his hand, he calls out "Water Ball," and instantly, a sphere of water forms in his palm. The other elements work just as seamlessly, and Takumi is able to use them effortlessly on his first attempt. With his newfound magic abilities figured out, he begins to consider his next steps and decides to make his way to the nearest village. While walking, Takumi comes across a stick in the middle of the path. It looks like a really nice stick, so he uses his appraisal skill to scan it and finds out that this is treant wood. It's gotten from a wood monster and is really useful for making things like magic staves and spears. Takumi decides to put his modeling skill to the test and uses it on the wood to create a spear. Since the wood works so well, Takumi decides to scan around to see if there are any other useful plants nearby. He finds a ton of them, so he spends the next hour picking them. However, he doesn't know what to do with all these plants since they definitely won't fit in his bag. He might have to leave them behind, but then Takumi remembers that he has an item box skill, so he uses it to store all the plants. Suddenly, Takumi hears a scream nearby. Moments later, a little girl bursts out of the bushes and runs straight to him, pleading for help because a monster is chasing her. When Takumi turns to see the creature, he's faced with a massive, horned rabbit. The rabbit charges at him with incredible speed, nearly impaling him, but at the last moment, Takumi panics and accidentally stabs the rabbit in the head, killing it instantly. He's stunned that a beginner like him managed to defeat such a creature, and assumes it must be thanks to Lady Nolan's blessing. In reality, the goddess had nothing to do with it. It was pure dumb luck. After his fight, Takumi is granted the job title of warrior, much to his dismay, as he had hoped to avoid combat entirely. However, he sets that aside for now and checks to see if the little girl is unharmed. She introduces herself as Molly and assures him she's fine, explaining that she was out gathering herbs but wandered too far from Board Village and ended up getting attacked. When Molly mentions a village, Takumi gets excited and asks if he can go there. Molly agrees to guide him, but first points out that the rabbit's meat is delicious and asks if he's planning to take it with him. Realizing it would be a waste to leave it behind, Takumi stuffs the rabbit into his item box. Only then does it hit him that he just revealed his item box skill in front of Molly, even though he intended to keep it a secret. Resigned to his slip-up, Takumi follows Molly as they begin their journey to the village. At the same time, the other people who got summoned have just arrived in the Empire of Sidonia, and they are incredibly confused about what's going on. None of them are hurt, but they have no idea where they are. All of a sudden, they hear someone call out to them as heroes. A woman approaches and tells them that they are no longer in their original world, and that they have been summoned to use their power as heroes to save this world. She introduces herself to them as the Empress of the Sidonia Empire, Elizabeth, and one look at her face makes the kids realize that she's shady as hell. Just then, Akane's unique skill kicks in, and it seems Nolan granted her the blessing of revelation. If she follows her gut instinct, she will naturally arrive at the right answer. And right now, Akane's gut is telling her that Elizabeth is a traitor, so she can't be trusted. By the time Takumi arrives in Board Village, Molly's parents come out to greet him and thank him for rescuing their daughter. Molly's father introduces himself as Banga, while her mother is Martha. They express their admiration for Takumi, assuming he must be a very responsible person to have traveled such a long distance on his own. Takumi takes the opportunity to ask if it would be possible for him to stay in the village for a while, explaining that he has nowhere else to go. Banga and Martha warmly welcome him, but mention that, unfortunately, there isn't an inn in the village, so there's currently no place for him to stay. However, they suggest a solution. The villagers can build him a house. Soon, the entire village gathers around an empty plot of land, ready to get started. Wanting to contribute in some way, Takumi decides to use his earth magic to flatten the ground for the foundation. It's the first time he's used magic on such a large scale, and the effort nearly causes him to pass out from mana depletion. The villagers are all amazed that Takumi can use earth magic so easily. Takumi asks if they think he just did something strange, but they tell him not to worry about it, since he has taken care of the foundation. The rest of them get to work assembling his house for him. By the next morning, Takumi's house is completed. Thanks to his carpentry, blacksmithing, and sewing skills, Takumi is able to make a good set of furniture for himself. But there's something else he's been meaning to try out. He got a bunch of ores from the village blacksmith, Boron, and he wants to try using alchemy to extract the metal. Takumi finds himself with iron ore, silver ore, copper ore, and even some magic iron ore. Starting with the iron, he decides to try making an iron ingot. Normally, this process would require a large furnace and several hours of labor, but thanks to his alchemy skill, he's able to do it instantly. However, the process consumes a significant amount of his mana. His first attempt at ore extraction is a success, and Takumi is thrilled with the result. Excited by the possibilities, he resolves to extract as much as he can so he'll have plenty of materials to work with later. After a few hours, Molly stops by Takumi's house to bring him some dinner. When she opens the door, she's horrified to find him collapsed on the floor, looking completely drained. It turns out Takumi had pushed himself too hard with the ore extraction and came dangerously close to dying from mana depletion. Luckily, Martha and Banga gave him a recovery potion, bringing him back to normal. While Takumi is eager to continue practicing his alchemy, he had to promise them he wouldn't overdo it again. Over time, Takumi extracts a bunch of iron, copper, and even a bit of gold, allowing him to make a ton of useful tools. Once he is done with his alchemy practice, he spends time with Boron in the forge, learning how to make all kinds of weapons. The blade he forges turns out really well, and once Boron is done making the sheath, it will be complete. Takumi's blacksmithing skill is now at level 40, so he's done practicing that for now and decides to move on to something else. Takumi approaches Banga and asks if he can borrow a couple of potions. Banga agrees without hesitation, but he mentions that the potions he has are basic and might not be very useful. Takumi assures him that's fine, explaining that he just needs an example to use as a template. He plans to create his own potions using the herbs he collected from the forest. Impressed by Takumi's initiative, Banga offers his full support and even says he'll buy some potions from him once the first batch is ready. Takumi thanks Banga and, with the basic potion in hand, begins crafting his own version. He uses hillock leaves and water to create it, carefully following his process. Once finished, he pours the potion into a glass jar and compares it to the one Banga provided. Both are blue, but the potion Takumi made is noticeably more vibrant and appears to contain traces of magic. Despite the promising appearance, Takumi isn't sure if it's a success. He knows he needs to test it to confirm it's safe, but the thought of potentially poisoning himself makes him hesitant to take the risk. To build up some poison tolerance, he decides to eat whatever questionable items he can find until he's about to die, and then use healing magic to cure himself. After a couple of hours of this self-destructive experiment, he feels absolutely terrible. On the bright side, curing himself so much has granted him the purification skill, which will definitely come in handy at some point. As Takumi is getting back to his feet, he hears a noise behind him and finds a massive boar staring him down. The boar is clearly hostile, so Takumi readies his spear to defend himself. However, as the boar charges, the spear breaks on impact, leaving the boar unscathed and Takumi defenseless. Desperate, he uses every type of magic at his disposal, but nothing seems to harm the boar. As if things couldn't get any worse, he catches sight of a poison spider creeping up behind him, poised to strike. Takumi realizes he's completely cornered. Instead of attacking Takumi, the spider turns its attention to the boar, throwing off its charge and causing it to miss him. However, the boar isn't backing down and continues its assault, leaving Takumi with little time to react. So far, none of his physical attacks have worked, but there's still one tactic he hasn't tried. As the boar charges at him again, Takumi leaps into the air and, at the moment of impact, uses his alchemy skill on the boar's head to break it down. His quick thinking pays off, allowing him to survive the encounter. Now that he's safe, Takumi decides to check on the spider since it helped him out earlier. The spider is in really poor shape after being hit by the boar. Takumi decides to heal it so it doesn't die. Afterwards, he gets up to return to the village, but then he receives a notification telling him that he has successfully tamed the spider. He didn't realize it was even possible to tame a spider, but he's hesitant to take it with him since spiders are considered dangerous monsters. The spider gives Takumi an adorable look with its cutesy eyes, and despite everything, he decides to accept it as his pet. To make it official, he names her Maple. Not long after, Takumi returns to the village, proudly showing off the massive boar he managed to kill. The villagers are impressed by his feat, but their amazement grows even more when they see the poisonous spider he's tamed. No one has ever accomplished such a thing before, leaving them in awe of Takumi's abilities. Putting that aside, Takumi suggests that the villagers share the boar since there's no way he can finish it on his own. That evening, the village throws a grand feast in his honor. While everyone else is enjoying the festivities, Banga approaches Takumi with the valuable leftovers from the boar and advises him to sell them in the nearest city, Bolton. With that, Takumi decides that Bolton will be his next destination. Meanwhile, Goddess Nolan has been keeping an eye on Takumi and is delighted by how well he's doing. One of her fellow goddesses questions her intentions, asking what she hopes to accomplish by giving Takumi such extraordinary treatment. After all, she provided him with a special body, a unique blessing, and even sent him back an entire year before Sidonia activated the summoning spell. Nolan, however, simply replies that she doesn't have any specific motive. She's just following what she believes to be the right thing to do. The next morning, Takumi wakes up to discover he's tied up in bed, instantly realizing that Maple is the one responsible. Maple apologizes, explaining that she has been feeling really lonely because Takumi has been so busy lately, and she just wanted to grab his attention. Takumi reflects and understands that he has been so caught up in his work that he hasn't been spending much time with Maple. Determined to make it up to her, he decides to take the day off from work and spend time playing with Maple, which makes her incredibly happy. Just then, Martha walks in to bring Takumi some lunch. It looks like something weird is going on between Takumi and Maple, but Takumi assures her that it's not what she thinks. Martha takes his word for it, but she can't help but notice that the silk Maple produced looks really nice. She plans to milk Maple dry of as much silk as she can. Later that day, Martha manages to craft a shirt made from spider silk, and all the women in the village are completely enamored with the texture of the fabric. Takumi is surprised to learn that spider silk is in such high demand. The women explain that spider silk is considered a luxury material, usually only affordable to nobles. Martha then asks Maple if she could produce more silk for her. Maple begins squirting it out, but the process is slow and time-consuming, meaning she won't have the chance to play with Takumi for a while. Takumi is a little disappointed since he was looking forward to spending time with Maple for once, but he still has things to do anyway, so he's not too bothered. It has been roughly a month since Takumi first came to this village, and he intends to head to the city and study his alchemy. However, he can't bring himself to say goodbye to all the villagers after spending so much time with them. Takumi heads over to the forge to meet with Boron and continue honing his blacksmithing skills. Before long, they successfully craft a chest plate that fits Takumi perfectly, along with a pair of steel toe boots. Boron mentions that the boots could come in handy if Takumi ever needs to kick something, but Takumi quickly clarifies that he has no intention of fighting, as his true focus is on becoming an alchemist. Just then, Banga shows up, and he's glad to see that Takumi's armor is finally complete. However, he admits he's going to miss Takumi once he's gone. He knows Takumi can't stay here forever if he wants to expand his production business. It's the logical move for him to head to the city, where he can sell more goods and get a reliable supply of materials. A trader from Bolton is going to come to the village in a couple of days, so Banga arranged for Takumi to ride with him on his way back to Bolton. Though they're sad to see him leave, they understand it's for the best and encourage Takumi to start getting his things ready. Grateful for all their support, Takumi thanks them and begins heading back to his house to pack up. On the way, he crosses paths with Martha, who is carrying a bucket of meat. Curious, he asks what she's up to, and Martha explains that she's on her way to dispose of the innards of a horned rabbit that Banga caught. She mentions that while the innards are considered the tastiest part of the rabbit, they require careful processing to eliminate any diseases or parasites. This village doesn't have the equipment necessary to do that, so she has to throw the meat away so no one gets sick. However, Takumi tells her that won't be necessary since he can just purify the meat. He bends down and uses purification magic, so the meat in the bucket should be safe to eat now. While Martha is indeed thankful, she is equally stunned that Takumi can use light magic. She tells him that he probably shouldn't reveal he can use light magic when he leaves this village because very few people in this world are capable of it. If people found out, it would draw a lot of unwanted attention. Takumi takes her warning to heart and vows to be cautious about revealing his powers. However, while he remains in the village, he decides to use his abilities to improve their quality of life as much as possible. Using earth magic, he constructs a sturdy brick wall to enhance the village security. For added convenience, he installs a water pump and creates a few other useful amenities. By the time he finishes, the village has been completely transformed, looking like an entirely new place. When the merchant arrives, he barely recognizes it. Banga comes out to greet Paypek, and after completing a trade deal, Takumi walks up so they can start going. Papik has already heard a lot about Takumi from Banga, so he introduces himself, and everyone asks if Takumi has all his stuff ready. Takumi assures them he hasn't forgotten anything, but there is one thing he wants to give them. He takes a potion from his bag and hands it to Banga, mentioning that he already left around 100 of these bottles at Banga's house, in case of any emergencies. He wants Banga to use them to heal injuries. Papik, stunned by the quality of the potion, asks if he can take a closer look. Upon examining it, he confirms that it's a high-level potion. The rest of the villagers soon show up to bid Takumi farewell. Papik says he will wait for them to finish their goodbyes before he leaves. Molly says goodbye to Maple, who's sleeping in Takumi's sack, and Martha hands him an outfit she and the other ladies made for him out of maple silk. Takumi is really grateful for their thoughtful gift and thanks everyone once more for being so kind to him, even though they haven't known him long. He climbs into the carriage, and the villagers give him a warm and heartfelt send-off, assuring him that he will always have a place in their village. As Papik and Takumi set out for Bolton, Papik comments on how much the villagers clearly adore him. Even the others in the carriage can sense that Takumi was like family to the villagers, and the emotional farewell deeply touches Heath's heart. By the way, the group, also heading to Bolton, introduces themselves. The blonde guy introduces himself as Heath, the redhead is Real, and the gloomy-looking guy over there is named Bogger. They are part of a C-rank party called Lion Fang and are serving as Papik's bodyguards. However, the region is quite peaceful, leaving them with little to do. Real notices Takumi clutching his bag tightly and asks if he's carrying something valuable inside. Takumi responds, explaining that his pet killer spider is sleeping inside. The group is shocked that Takumi managed to tame such a dangerous creature. Real, however, insists on seeing the spider but comes across as overly creepy about it. Maple responds by headbutting him right in the face. Takumi immediately begins apologizing for Maple's actions, but the others reassure him there's no need, as Real completely deserved it. In fact, Heath jokes that after meeting Real, Maple might end up fearing all humans from now on. However, that doesn't seem to be the case since she seems to have taken a liking to Bogger. While everyone starts fawning over Maple, Papik calls Takumi to the front because he wants to talk about the potion he saw Takumi holding earlier. He asks if there are any more of those in stock, because, if so, he would love to buy some. Takumi doesn't really mind selling Papik the potions, but all of a sudden, his horse stops, and it looks like there's trouble ahead. There is a horde of goblins surrounding the carriage for an attack, which is really bad news. The group seems eager that they finally have a chance to take action. They tell Takumi and Papik to relax and leave everything to them as they step onto the field. With about 20 goblins scattered across the area, they're confident in their abilities and dive into the fight. Real takes down the goblins from a distance with his bow, while Bogger and Heath handle the rest up close with their mace and axe. It doesn't take long before they've wiped out all the goblins. Afterward, they get to work dissecting the creatures to retrieve the magic stones. Soon after, everyone returns to the carriage, and their journey continues for 3 days until they reach Bolton. Upon entering the city, the Lion Fang members head to the Adventurers Guild to report the success of their bodyguard mission. Takumi accompanies them, as he also needs to register with the guild to remain in the city. Takumi would have preferred to join the Alchemist Guild, but since there isn't one in the area, he's left with no choice but to register as an adventurer instead. Hans, the receptionist, explains that Takumi can use the Adventurer Guild card as a form of identification, and as long as he completes at least one simple quest per month, the card will remain active. Takumi proceeds to register as an adventurer and introduces Maple as his pet. After all the registrations are complete, Takumi heads to Papik's trading company to work on a deal for the potions. He has roughly 100 of 3 different potions in stock, and all of them are extremely high quality. Papik is prepared to pay 10 silver coins for each healing and stamina potion and 50 silver coins for each mana potion. Takumi does some quick math in his head and realizes that he would make over 7 million yen. Takumi feels that the amount of money mentioned is far too much, but Papik explains that he could have earned even more if he already had an established reputation as a producer. With that in mind, since Takumi plans to work as a producer in the city, Papik suggests finding a house with an attached workshop for convenience. However, this makes Takumi realize that he hadn't even considered where he would live once he arrived in the city. Papik decides to help him out a little and calls for his assistant, Thomas, so he can show Takumi a good property with an affordable rate. However, when Takumi finally sees the house, it looks way more like a mansion, so he doesn't think he can afford it. Thomas assures him that the mansion is quite affordable and guarantees that there are no ghosts here, so he won't have to worry about that. Takumi spots the workshop connected to the house and starts thinking seriously about purchasing it, as it would be ideal for his work. With the money he made from selling potions to Papik, he has enough to afford it. After considering it for a while, he decides to move forward and tells Thomas that he'll buy the mansion. Thomas is glad to hear that and says he will get started on the paperwork immediately so Takumi can move in tomorrow if he wants. As they're walking through the city streets, Takumi smells something foul in the air. Thomas can tell that the smell is bothering Takumi, so he explains that the foul stench is coming from the sewers. Wealthy individuals use magical purifiers to cleanse their sewage, but the main city sewers lack such a luxury. Magical purifiers are incredibly rare, as they can only be discovered in ancient ruins or dungeons, making them far too costly to install in the city's sewer system. While priests are occasionally hired to manually purify the sewers using magic, the sewers remain filthy for the majority of the time. The next day, Takumi and Maple move into their new house, and the first thing Takumi wants to do is find a solution to the sewer problem. He gets a piece of quartz and clay from Papek's company, and after using magic to shape it, he combines fire magic with space-time magic to bake it quickly. After doing that for a while, Takumi's mana is completely drained, so he has to drink a couple of mana potions. On the bright side, he does manage to complete his creation, a modern toilet. At that moment, Takumi hears Papek shouting from the living room.